This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can I welcome everybody to today's Economy Committee meeting. Members of the public may like to follow us at London Assembly on X using the hashtag Assembly Economy. Please may I remind everyone to switch their phones to silent mode and ask that members and guests ensure that electronic devices are not placed in front of their microphones. Members and guests are also reminded to position their microphones so that they can be heard clearly, and I'm giving a very good example of not doing that. And if you need to move your microphone, please do it like this rather than that, because it breaks them and people get very upset. Today our main item of business is on free school meals in London. Before we begin, we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I now ask our committee clerk, Jack Booth, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. We have no apologies for absence.
Thank you. Can I ask some items of business? Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? No interest, thank you. The minutes of the last meeting, can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 17th October 2023 to be signed by me as a correct record of that meeting? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings? Thank you, committee. We can now move on to our main item of business, which is a discussion with our invited guests on free school meals in London. The item will be split into 2 panels. Joining us at City Hall for the first panel are Barbara Crowther from the campaign, who's the campaign coordinator for Sustain, Daniel Kebede, who's the General Secretary of the National Education Union, and Dr. Katharine Vincent, the Director of Reconnect London. Could I also pass on the apologies of Councillor Jasmine, the Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Children, Education and Refugees at Southwark Council, who is unable to attend this morning. Thank you for the 3 of you for being here this morning. I will start with the first question. and it is to the three of you. What are the main health and educational and financial benefits for children of receiving free school meals? Katharine, I wonder if you could start.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Good start. Thank you, Chair. I'll start by saying that free school meals have significant and wide-ranging benefits for young Londoners and their families. They help ensure that all children can flourish and thrive, regardless of the circumstances in which they or their families are living. They also have long-lasting benefits into adulthood in relation to educational outcomes, as well as social, financial and health benefits, both for individuals and for wider society. Free school meals are particularly important for children living in poverty, and we know that child poverty has risen in London in recent years and that it's grown further since the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, the attainment gap between children experiencing disadvantage and their peers has been growing and is now at its highest for over a decade. Without funding for free school meals, this attainment gap would almost certainly be even greater, and schools would be struggling even more than they are at present to support children who are experiencing adverse financial circumstances. Across the country, around 30% of children are living in poverty. That includes 1.3 million primary school children and 1 million children under the age of 4. Increases in child poverty are reflected in the increasing numbers of pupils who are eligible for free school meals and the pupil premium. And pupil premium eligibility has risen from just over 1.2 million children in 2011-12 to over 2 million, or 1 in 4 pupils nationally in 2022. Furthermore, we know that low-income families often experience a higher inflation rate than higher-income households, and that this has been the case over the last 2 years because the recent rise in inflation has been driven by increased prices of essentials like energy and food. So for many lower-income households, the cost of preparing a hot, healthy, nutritious evening meal is extremely difficult, particularly for families with several young children, making provision of free school meals even more important. We know that some groups are more likely than others to experience poverty and therefore particularly benefit from the provision of free school meals. That includes several groups that are overrepresented in London and are also among the key groups who often underachieve at school. So 49% of children in single-parent families are living in poverty, 46% of children from black and minority ethnic groups, and 47% of children in families with 3 or more children. Children with special educational needs and disabilities are also significantly more likely to be living in poverty than those without additional needs. So free school meals are particularly important for those children. In Tower Hamlets, for example, 56% of children are living in poverty after housing costs, but this rises to over 80% in the borough's special schools, pupil referral units and other alternative provision settings. In London, there are particular issues which exacerbate the situation for low-income families, which I know the committee has heard about in previous evidence sessions. Families in London are more likely than those elsewhere to be affected by the 2-child limit and the benefit cap, as well as the freeze in local housing allowance and the high costs of childcare and travel. This makes funding for free school meals even more important for London families who are facing adverse socio-economic circumstances. Research, including by the Child Poverty Action Group, has explored in detail how children affected by poverty are more likely to experience overcrowding, poor living conditions, homelessness, food insecurity, poor nutrition, fuel poverty, social exclusion and mental health difficulties. They also often face the challenge of not being able to fully participate in school life because, for example, they can't afford new school uniform, take part in charity events or pay for school trips. Research carried out by Teacher Tap for Fair Share in September 2023 showed that 26% of teachers were giving food to children to avoid them going hungry. In this context, funding for free school meals is not a luxury, but a necessity. It alleviates the financial burden on families, freeing up crucial funds for other basic living expenses and making it more likely that children will be able to succeed in school because, fundamentally, we know that children cannot learn if they are hungry. So, providing free school meals...
Katharine, I'm really sorry.
Is that the end of my time? That's absolutely fine.
And you have covered an awful lot there. Thank you very much. No problem. I am going to ask both Barbara and Daniel, if there is nothing more that you want to add to that, I've got 2 very specific questions for you both. So is there anything you'd like to add?
I've got some evidence of benefit that might be worth drawing here.
Please.
That might... So just to add to what Katharine's saying, there have been evaluations of delivery of free school meals that have shown, one study indicates that there's a £10 saving per child per week to families. a potential £34.50 saving for a household with one parent, one child, or up to £69 a week for a family with two parents and two eligible children. And it's significant when we know how pressurised family budgets are. We know that that can often then result in the family then freeing up budget to buy better quality food. So better school food can lead to better quality food at home. We also know that we've talked to one school where their parents are saying they're signing their children up for exercise classes. So there's an overall health benefit. We know that free school meals reduces stigma when provided on a universal basis. That doesn't necessarily occur when you only provide a targeted basis. It shows how it reduces pressures of anxiety, depression for children who worry about what's happening at home and bring those worries into school, as well as the effects of stigma, embarrassment and shame if they're singled out, for example, on a school trip. So it might be controlled very well when they're in school, but then once these peripheral activities, there's extra registration that singles them out. The University of Essex has produced a study showing that that there is, in the 4 London boroughs that have been doing universal school meals for quite some time, that there has been a reduction in the trends on obesity prevalence of around 9.3% amongst reception-age children and 5.6% amongst Year 6 children. And then, as Katharine said, we've got evidence of learning and attainment, not particularly in the UK evidence of increased attendance, but that's because there isn't very much research in the UK around that. There is evidence of that occurring in other countries, but we do know that the original pilots that the government conducted, where they did pilots in Hull and Newham, of universal entitlement versus targeted increased entitlement in Wolverhampton, in the universal schools there was an increase of between 4 and 8 weeks attainment in maths and English, and that did not occur in the targeted attainment boroughs. So that's just a few additional points to add.
Thank you very much. Daniel, did you want to add anything?
No.
Okay, thank you. So, the next question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of universal free school meals as opposed to targeted provision? Barbara, I know you've answered some of that, so I wonder, Daniel, if we could start with you.
Yes, absolutely. So just as a starting point, I'd like to absolutely commend Mayor Khan and the London Assembly for a really ambitious approach here. I think it's something that should be absolutely celebrated. Before being elected, I was a teacher and I've taught in the northeast of England and I've taught in Stockwell and have seen firsthand, the impact and benefits of free school meal provision and really am a huge supporter of its universalism. As we've already heard, it can lead to an increased level in attainment, but one thing that I will say is that child poverty generally leads to an entire wastage of human creativity. We lose doctors, we lose architects, and it's down to essentially a political choice. So I really do commend you all for taking that on. Children who use food banks, or in families who use food banks, can tend to get lower grades by half a grade on average. But to focus on that universalism and the benefits, every child has access to a nutritious lunch. Eating together is a social experience in which children will find try new foods. But of course, it impacts on every child during the day. Having that healthy lunch, it improves their mood, their attention, and of course, it improves their learning outcomes. But the cost of living crisis has been really profound on families. So in 2022, we saw families going, on average, being £800 a year poorer, 4 million children in food poverty, so essentially going hungry. And one argument for universal free school meals that is not made enough, I don't think, is around the economic benefits more broadly to the economy. So PricewaterhouseCoopers have done some research that for every pound on that is spent on universal free school meals, the economy gets £1.71 in return. We really do need to look at this provision as an economic investment in the future of the country.
Thank you very much. And we've heard some people say that universal free school meals would be like a reverse Robin Hood tax, taking from the poor to give to the rich. I wonder if either of you would like to comment on that. Barbara?
Thank you. And yeah, just to endorse what Daniel was saying about how we commend this activity.
Sorry, Barbara, could you turn your microphone on, please? Is it on?
It is on.
Okay.
Is it not? Yes.
No, what it means is that I need glasses because I can't see the light.
Okay.
But thank you.
Okay. Just to build on the last point that Daniel made, that economic benefit for universal approaches compares to a £1.38 for every pound. So it's £1.71 under universal, £1.38 under a targeted approach relating to universal credit. So there is a wider economic benefit. What we also do see is there are improvements in classroom cohesion, classroom behaviour. So you do see attainment benefits, and it helps teachers get back to teaching because teachers are not having to deal with all of these additional requirements for support and the effects of children being hungry, lack of attention, tiredness, and poor behaviour in the classroom. There's been a really interesting study in Sweden by Lundborg that has shown that children exposed to their universal school meals programme, every child had an increase in lifetime earnings. Well, the average across every child was a lifetime increase in earnings of around 3%. For children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, it was 6%. So basically, the programme has lifted all children's potential, but it has disproportionately lifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds and closed that gap. And I wanted to just say that there's a really, really good rapid evidence review that's been produced by Bremner and Company, an impact on urban and health, that is available, that looks across all of this evidence, and I recommend that the committee does take that documentation, which we can supply, and I think it's now being published as well. So, yeah, I'll pass to Katharine.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Chair. I absolutely agree with the points that have been made so far. And in addition, I think it's important to talk about why we're having the conversation about universality. And that's partly because it is widely agreed that we need to broaden the current eligibility criteria for free school meals. Research by Impact on Urban Health again suggests that up to a third of children in the UK living in poverty don't meet current eligibility criteria. So there are quite a lot of children living in poverty and living in low-income families who currently are not getting free school meals. That's partly because the threshold for eligibility has been frozen since 2018, while inflation and wages have been rising. I think it's also important to mention the alternatives to universal provision compared with the current system. And one alternative would be to provide free school meals to all families in receipt of universal credit. That would mean that an additional 1.7 million children across the country whose families are eligible for universal credit, so 69% of that group, would become eligible for free school meals. And that will cost about £1 billion a year, compared with £2.5 billion, which it would cost to make universal free school meals across the country available to everybody. So there's a significant cost saving there. And of course, one thing that would do would make sure that families up to an annual household income of about £55,000 could all know that when their children went to school, they were always going to get a hot, healthy and nutritious meal. And I think one of the things that would do for families would take away the worry, take away the stress, take away that knowledge that, you know, if you earn a little bit more money, you might stop being eligible. If your circumstances change, you may no longer get that benefit. And so I think that the idea of increasing eligibility to encompass all families who receive universal credit could be something, could be an alternative if universality was felt not to be affordable. And one reason that seems sensible is because it uses an existing mechanism for means testing. And one of the things we don't want to do is introduce any new mechanisms for that, because we know that they're expensive and also that they can lead to families falling through the gaps in the net.
Thank you very much. I wonder we've touched on the issue of stigma. You've all said the word stigma. What I'd like to ask you is there a stigma associated with receiving means-tested free school meals? And if so, how could you give examples of how this is experienced by children and the evidence of it? And does the universal provision of free school meals help to alleviate stigma? I wonder, Barbara, if you could start, please.
Thank you. Obviously, schools go to great extent to try and avoid children in receipt of free school meals being singled out. So I think, in many schools they try and manage it incredibly well. Obviously, there are occasions when schools need to bring forward children in receipt of free school meals in order to give, to send additional information home to parents and things like that. So it's quite hard to avoid. I think particularly, actually, the stigma, the evidence around secondary schools is particularly strong, actually, because the grant, the free school meals grant, is on the card. Quite often that relates to the meal of the day. Children can't always buy everything that's on the menu, and therefore, it starts to become very apparent who's buying what, and so that can show in that way. I think what we do know is around 11% of eligible children are not taking up their entitlement, and I think that is to do with families not wanting their children to be identified in school, as well as the form filling exercises. And so, another solution that we're currently advocating is the automatic enrolment for free school meals, and also ensuring that is happening on pupil premium. And there's some really interesting work happening. It started in Sheffield and Yorkshire, and now several London boroughs are looking at automating entitlement, and what they've realised is there are missing millions in school budgets as a result of the loss of pupil premium from families not signing up for their entitlement.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, so, means testing brings its own costs and its own bureaucratic burdens to the school system, so I'd really warn against that. On the more broader point around packed lunches and those sorts of things, even the middle classes are not doing a good job. 2% of packed lunches meet nutritional requirements. So there's something really beneficial to the universalism here. As in a very important point is around stigma. Stigma is well documented, even when schools are doing their best to minimise that. Children, very much deserve the right to live in dignity, and of course there is a stigma that comes with poverty beyond just being in receipt of free school meals. And providing that universalism will enable families to have greater financial security to minimise that stigma. And there were protests in Newham, where there were the parents protesting in Newham when the universal free school meals were being withdrawn. It is something that all parents, I think, appreciate when they have access to it.
Thank you. Assembly Member Bakari, you had a question.
Thank you so much, Chair. I want to touch on the stigma and shame element. We did a previous committee meeting on food banks, and that was very much the emphasis that we got from when we were talking to particular groups there. The one particular group that I want to focus on is the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities. There was a lot of stigma and shame discussed about that community when they were approaching food banks, and I think that's definitely the case here for children as well. And interestingly, it's quite a high percentage of children from that community that are on free school meals. Can you tell me a little bit about why that might be the case?
So I think we all need to focus particularly on racial and ethnic disparities in education, and there's been lots of good work go on. However, data suggests in every regard Gypsy, Roma and Traveller children are struggling the most in terms of education, and we need to actually focus resources to support that community, particularly, I believe. There is a great stigma associated with poverty, and if you're a community that is more likely to access food banks, then you are more likely to experience that stigma, and that is something that we all must do much more to work on. But it's not just those in the absolute poverty that are experiencing great deals of stigma also. So much of our member feedback currently at the moment is also around families who are just about managing, those families who are not eligible for free school meals, who are struggling day to day with the cost of living. Our feedback from our members at the moment is that, you know, those are experiencing high levels of stigma also.
Thank you.
Might I just add one point? Another group that we've been particularly concerned about are children from households with no recourse to public funds. And obviously through a universal approach, all children on the roll are automatically entitled. And I was visiting a school in Wandsworth in Battersea where although the government has temporarily has extended that entitlement, it taken 2 administrative staff about 3 weeks working every single day, several hours a day, to try and get those 2 children in their school through the system. And so, you know, that's another kind of way we can make sure that we're not just singling out individuals that are already very vulnerable.
Yeah.
I'd like to come in and on that point of the automatic enrolment. The schools minister has come back to the economy committee about this and says that there's complex data systems, legal implications to such a change. You know, what would your response be to that? Because the implications, you know, that you're referring to, the need that, you know, on balance, the challenges compared to the benefits of automatic enrolment could mean, you know, differences for the education of these children. Do you want to come in on that, Barbara? Or
I'm not the expert on automated enrolment, but I do know that it's something that a lot of the London boroughs are looking at in detail. And I think one of the ways that it's being currently approached is through an opt-out process rather than an opt-in process with parents. And that has resulted in, I think Lewisham has managed to recoup about £1.2 million worth of pupil premium. And obviously this is one of the complications that we do have in the school meal system, is that free school meal entitlement is used as this proxy for disadvantage. Obviously we've managed to, we're already managing that on a national basis on universal infant free school meals. So there are other ways to make sure we can connect data systems and the information around welfare and benefits into our local councils so that schools can access pupil premium, which is their entitlement, whilst rolling out a universal school meal system. But I'm not an expert on the logistics, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I mean, just my last point, and this is, you know, linked to the stigma and the issues of claiming free school meals. 14% of eligible children haven't claimed. Is that because of stigma? Is it perhaps even particular ethnic groups that are not taking it on for particular cultural reasons?
So I think there are barriers that communities can face, language barriers being one of them. There is a real issue, you know, the nature of the economy and society at the moment means that families' financial situations can change very quickly, and you know, unless you are up to you know, scratch with all your knowledge on eligibility around any, you know, access that you can, anything you can access, it can cause a real problem. Auto enrolment does alleviate some of that problem for families, and is, I think, something that we should really be looking towards, not just ensuring that young people have access to the free school meals that they are entitled to, but also that schools are able to access the pupil premium funding that they are in turn entitled to. And it's really important to remember, I think, that actually last year the majority of young people who went hungry were those who were not in receipt of free school meals for whatever reason, but living in poverty. So 57% of children who missed a meal last year were not accessing free school meals at the time, and that is something, you know, auto-enrolment can help alleviate.
Thank you. Assembly Member Boff.
I just wondered which schools in London are reinforcing that stigma?
I'm going to be brave enough to answer that question by saying that I know that London schools and schools across the country have done a huge amount to reduce stigma and a huge amount to make sure that all children receive the benefits for which they're eligible, and that they minimise any potential negative consequences of that. And the feedback that we've been receiving from head teachers within our network, albeit anecdotal at this stage, is that the current policy is helping to bring children together in school and having benefits, even though they have already done a lot to reduce stigma. So, for example, they're finding that children who previously didn't eat at lunchtime are eating now because everyone's eating and everyone's sitting down and their friends are eating, and so they're taking part. They're also finding that they can monitor more closely vulnerable children and what they're eating. So one head teacher mentioned a child who's on a child in need plan who they know has issues with access to healthy food at home, and they know that she doesn't always have a healthy meal at home in the evening, but now food is available at school. They can make sure that she's having that one meal a day at school.
Can you, thank you very much for that anecdotal evidence, but I just want names of schools.
I know that
I want to give them some stigma. So which ones are they?
I can give one particular example of something that is actually quite difficult for schools. So when I was a head teacher in East London, one of the things that was mentioned to us was that we needed to make sure that children who were eligible for free school meals had access to the carryover amounts every day. So if a child receiving free school meals receives that kind of nominal amount, £2.41 or £2.65 a day, if they're absent or if they don't have a meal that day, one thing I previously hadn't realised as head teacher is that the catering system would automatically then take that balance down to zero the next day. And so we were then able to start to create a system whereby it was fairer for those children because the money could be rolled over and they could then have access to it later. So
I'm looking at stigma here. I'm not looking for back office calculations, things which teachers rightly conceal from other pupils and rightly keep confidential. I'm talking about school names. You know, where does this happen in London? I have never heard of it happen anywhere in London. It did when I was a boy, and people used to have a ticket, and it was considered divisive, and they got rid of that system decades ago. I just have never heard of a school where this is apparent, and I'd love to get a name, because if you're going to justify on the basis of stigma, which is a big part of the impact assessment, then you've got to show where that stigma happens.
Assembly Member Boff, I absolutely applaud your vendetta against the schools that are doing this, and we've discussed it a number of times.
There's no point in having a vendetta if you've got nobody to
one of the
pursue.
issues that we have looked at, and the last meeting that we had made it, you know, the panellists there, and I think our panellists here are making it very clear that stigma now is far more subtle. So we've had an example of the type of food that can be bought. So whilst those, so my understanding is that whilst those, you know, the ticket system
Chair,
and things like that have gone.
I'm not going to get the name of a school out of this, am I?
And you keep asking for names of schools, and you're not get one.
Because I kind of think they don't exist. So do you not think that there is also a stigma to being auto-enrolled?
No. And I don't think there's a stigma to being auto-enrolled. And just to take on some of your point on stigma more generally, you know, when you have a child come to class, arrive in school tired and hungry, it's very difficult to hide that from the rest of the class. When you have a child who needs their some seconds wrapping up to take home, it's very difficult to hide that. Stigma doesn't come because schools aren't doing a good enough job to try and mitigate it or minimise it, because they absolutely are. Every teacher I know prioritises young people and wants them to live in dignity. The fact is, poverty creates its own stigma. And that's what universal free school meals mitigates against.
Can I just challenge you on that? Absolutely, we should be addressing poverty, but we're going to have a situation where children are still coming to school undernourished and tired from families that do not qualify for free school meals, do not receive universal credit, who are not on the face of it poor, but they've just got pretty neglectful parents. Now, I would have thought that is a role for the teachers and the school authorities to identify those children as individuals rather than as a mass. Wouldn't you say that it's best that we identify pupils for their individual needs rather than as a group?
Well, I think there's a problem because, children in receipt of universal credit from families in receipt of universal credit aren't automatically able to access free school meals. If you have,
I agree.
If you have a parent in work, for example, you may not be able to access free school meals. The state of the economy, as we've seen over the last 18 months, has created unmanageable levels of poverty for many people, and many of them, the majority of them, have parents in work, 75, 3/4 in fact. Stigma is created from that poverty, and schools do everything they can to mitigate against it.
I absolutely agree with you that schools and teachers have a role in identifying when children are arriving, and there are clearly issues at home. I'm a governor of a primary school, and in our safeguarding reports we get chapter and verse on measures the school is taking to address when children are turning up with torn clothing, when children are turning up clearly not having had breakfast, etc. So I agree with you, there is a role there. However, we've created a system here that is stigmatising by means testing children in what is meant to be an education free at the point of use, and treating our food and this nutritional safety net in the middle of a day where children are required to be, by law, treating that nutritional safety net as something to be means tested in a public service, which we don't do in hospitals for anybody of any background economically, and we don't do it even in our prisons where, with sometimes very wealthy fraudsters, we don't means test them, we feed them regardless. So we're means testing children in a public service in a way that we do not means test other parts of our society. And I think there are other countries around the world, Sweden, Finland, 8 US states now as of September, India, Brazil, Estonia, Portugal have all moved away from this, and increasingly, and we're seeing across the world now, a shift towards saying good nutrition equals good learning. And if you can remove this, and the universal system is the only one capable of making that school lunch experience a completely non-divisive experience.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for those round of questions. It still doesn't stop me from believing that this snark is a boo John.
Okay, thank you very much, Assembly Member Boff. And just for smoother running of future committee meetings, I don't think you are going to get the name of the school. I think we have established in various committee meetings that stigma is a much more subtle issue these days than an issue of tickets. Thank you. Moving on to Assembly Member Hirani.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start off with a question to Barbara. So what has been the impact of universal free school meals delivered by the London boroughs?
So what we've seen, first of all, is there's been a big increase. Do you mean the London boroughs that were doing this ahead of the Mayor's initiative?
So the ones, obviously we were due to have a speaker from one of the boroughs that had it previously, yes. But so if you have any experiences from the ones that had it existing before the universal programme was rolled out by the Mayor.
So obviously there's been some work looking at how over the years that they've been delivering universal school meals. I mentioned the evidence around obesity prevalence, and in Newham, for example, they are anchoring 60 jobs at London Living Wage through their universal school meals programme. Since the Mayor announced his initiative, obviously they have looked to reinvest some of their money. So most of those boroughs are topping up the £2.65. In Newham, they're topping it up to £3. In Southwark, they're topping it up to £2.90. I believe that in Islington it was previously well below the £2.65, and now they're meeting the £2.65 as a result of this. Westminster are, as well as implementing the GLA, the Mayor of London offer, and increasing the per meal price to £3 per meal, they also have introduced a free lunch offer for targeted 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds in nurseries and maintain nursery settings, and they're also expanding a free lunch offer for children in Key Stage 3 resident in Westminster as well. I don't believe they would be able to continue that once the Mayor's funding. They would have to then revert their funding back to their core primary school offer. So that's an extended 1-year pilot. Tower Hamlets, I think, as has been published, have introduced a universal secondary school meal offer. That was made available to every school in the borough. Not every school, I think, felt able to take it up fully in one term, because it's quite a major scale up, but there has been a fairly impressive take up in the first half term in the schools that have taken up that offer. In Newham as well, they're putting resource into topping up to £3 to ensure the full cost of sustainable healthy food and living wages. So they've associated it with a healthy meal bundle and the Food for Life programme, so to make sure they get good quality London living wage. The London government procurement standards are being met. As well as maintaining a £3.9 million investment in their holiday meals programme with holiday vouchers for all eligible children. So those are just some of the things that I'm aware of. In Southwark, they're expanding to all pupils in receipt of universal credit, including those children with no recourse to public funds who are not currently eligible for free school meals. And that includes sixth form, year 12 and year 13.
I'm glad you mentioned sort of funding as an issue as well, because certainly one of my borough's projections are showing that there's a long-term, a medium-term reduction expected in primary school places needed. Are you factoring that in terms of future projections of what this policy would cost? I imagine that would mean a massive cost reduction of what this policy delivers at the moment.
I believe that the studies that have been conducted have also looked at the kind of the population trends. I'm not sure what's been done in London. And obviously it is, every projection you need to look at what might happen around the costs of delivery, the costs of food itself, fuel, transport, staffing, as well as the numbers, the projected numbers, the quality of food, and whether we're trying to align the procurement of food also with good sustainability standards. So the per meal rate nationally is well below what the Local Authority Catering Association believes should have been the case. So it hadn't been increased for many years. It has just gone up from £2.41 to £2.53, which is still below what the Mayor's funding. The LACER, the Local Authority Catering Association, believes it should sit around £2.87, and that's particularly challenging for small schools. And so we do know that there are schools in London who are struggling to meet the £2.65 meal cost at the moment. Some boroughs are topping that up, and some boroughs are not.
And moving to the Mayor's Universal programme for all of London, so I'm going to start with Daniel on questioning for that. What have been the experiences of schools so far in implementing the Mayor's Universal Free School Meals programme in London?
So our members have been absolutely celebrating this as a policy and providing excellent feedback to us as a union on its rollout. We have to bear in mind, when we're talking about teachers and support staff, we survey them regularly, and number one, top of their concerns beyond their own pay and workload is child poverty. So the free school meal provision rollout was, welcomed with open arms broadly by the profession. We are very grateful for the collaborative approach from the GLA and the profession on this rollout. I think there's been open dialogue that has been really welcome. But I think one thing that we are all keen to sort of establish is that this is something that lasts beyond 1 year and has that long-term funding commitment.
I'll move to Dr. Vincent for the next one. Do you have any information on the impact of the programme on parents and children?
I think it's too early to say because we don't yet have the evaluations that I know will be taking place later this year, which will give us a much better insight into the impact. However, what schools are saying to us is that the scheme is very welcome by children and families in their school because many of them are facing very difficult financial circumstances, and that parents have very much welcomed the opportunity to take up that offer of a free lunch, that many have taken that up, and that many more children are now receiving that hot cooked meal every day. And schools have also talked about those children for whom it's been particularly beneficial. So one head gave an example of a child with special educational needs and with autism who's now able to supplement their packed lunch that they bring in from home, which contains quite a restricted range of items, with the items that are available in that free lunch at school to encourage them to expand their repertoire. And so head teachers are certainly talking about noticing benefits for children and families, but as I say, it's too early to have the full evidence base for that.
Thank you. Just on that, so I would like to say that I did take the opportunity to visit a primary school in my constituency where this is being rolled out, Kilburn Park School in Brent, and we did manage to speak to parents at the school as well. And previously I met in particular a single mother who has 2 children at the school, and difference that it's made for someone in her situation who was ineligible for free school meals in the past. The difference that it's made is the difference between not providing a hot meal, providing a packed lunch on occasions, and picking and choosing what days to pay for a meal for children, and just the logistical difference it's made, not having to worry about packing a packed lunch or preparing a packed lunch for 2 kids in the morning, and having that stress and relief off her mind has made a world of difference. Just one example that I've cited from my constituency. I think I'd encourage others to also visit schools and really ask the questions about the impact that it's having, because I found it an eye-opening experience for myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Assembly Member Garrett.
Morning. Just thinking about practicalities. So obviously there's a sort of revenue cost, a marginal revenue cost for each extra meal. But then obviously there's a sort of capital infrastructure element of, perhaps when you get to a certain tipping point to provide X extra meals, it becomes challenging within the existing facilities. I just wondered whether schools had run into problems with that. I don't know whether that's something you've looked at, Katharine, where schools have sort of run into either a capacity constraint with the kitchen or the dining room or facilities of that sort.
Yes, thank you for the question. Again, it's relatively early days to talk about the impact of this on schools, but the anecdotal evidence that we've gathered so far suggests actually that many of the anticipated infrastructure challenges were successfully overcome by schools and academy trusts, and that they had a lot of support from the GLA in relation to overcoming those. So I think that's an example of how those barriers were anticipated and they were successfully overcome. In some schools, nonetheless, capacity has been an issue. So one head teacher talked to us about how it's been financially challenging because they've had to pay out from their budget for extra hot serving stations, kitchen equipment, crockery and utensils and cutlery, which sounds relatively low level, but actually if every school in London is having to do that, that cost obviously adds up. Another head mentioned that they've had to recruit more midday meal supervisors, which again is an extra cost and difficult to recruit to at the present time, when it's harder to recruit to those kind of relatively low paid roles. One head of a large all-through school talked about how because of the sheer volume of children now taking lunch, they're having to run lunchtime between 11:30 a.m. and 2 p.m. So that the school is very busy, and they've had to put quite a lot of procedures into place, you can imagine, including extra duties for senior staff in order to manage that. So there have been some logistical and capacity challenges, but I think a lot of those have been overcome.
Sorry, you said it was early days, but presumably these are all the things that happen like day one. So literally the first day is when all those things come to, or even before that, obviously, because a well-planned school is going to notice, 50% more covers, I suppose, if a restaurant you call it, that you've got to get through.
That's right. And so when the policy was announced earlier this year, there was a lot of work that happened in a relatively short amount of time to make sure that the capacity was in place. And so, schools were set up to deliver to what was anticipated to be a significant increase in uptake. I know that there have been reports from local authorities of uptake, increasing, but that hasn't always been as much as people thought. And so one of the things that schools are saying to us is that they're still getting the message out there, and that at the moment their uptake may have gone from 75 to 80% or from 80 to 85, but they're still working on trying to, for example, persuade families that it would be better for them to have their child take a hot meal at school rather than bringing in a packed lunch, because some families are still saying that that's their preference. So schools are still working on that and anticipating potentially more increased capacity over time.
Okay, so so by and large that was a challenge, but it's largely been overcome. And are there places where that's still a problem? And what are the sort of big challenges that are harder to overcome or that are proving more persistent?
I think that one of the challenges is that logistical one of having more children that need to get through the lunch hall in a certain amount of time, and that at a time when obviously school teachers and school leaders are very busy in other regards. There has been an extra pressure on staff to undertake extra duties to manage the school building during that time and to make sure that that all runs smoothly, but that schools, as they always do, have made that work.
Was there support from the GLA for that, either financial, logistical advice, sharing best practice, that sort of thing?
There was some sharing of good practice, and the GLA made a website available with resources for schools and examples of kind of good practice in that regard. And I know that they also have a £5 million fund to support kind of extraordinary costs, such as, for example, in special schools where it might be that there's an extra cost to providing school lunches and to the support that children need while they're eating lunch, that they have provided financial support to schools as well in that regard.
Okay, I saw, Daniel, were you indicating, I think, that you wanted to say something on that point as well?
Yeah, broadly on the challenges, we're in regular contact with members, and I'm sure there will be some logistical challenges in schools in London somewhere. It's not been a primary source of feedback. We have had some feedback around difficulty around managing queues, getting more young people through the lunch hall. That is true, but I also think some of these will be ironed out, these logistical challenges, should there be that long-term funding commitment. I believe it's not only an issue around those sorts of logistical challenges, but I've taught in schools where the catering is done in-house because they have the necessary facilities. I've taught in schools where they don't, and the food has to be sort of brought in these polystyrene. It gets all sweaty, not that. Doesn't look all that good, so should there be that long-term funding commitment, schools can make those then necessarily long-term logistical commitments to ensure that children have access to not only free school meals but really high-quality free school meals. Because believe me, if you have a good chef and the necessary facilities, the free school meals can be exceptionally good.
So there are still some where there are problems, you think, but a longer-term funding would help with those problems?
That's right, yeah. It just gives schools the ability to plan.
Okay.
I think there's obviously a degree of scepticism that comes in when you're talking about a one-year programme about how much do you then take out of a school budget to invest in a more permanent upgrade of kitchens if the programme's going to be withdrawn. In my school, my head teacher reported a little bit of scepticism from parents about enrolling their children in the scheme because it's only a one-year programme. So there is a need. When the government brought in universal infant free school meals, there was a £150 million investment in the logistics and the infrastructure. So that meant there had been an upgrade of quite a lot of primary school kitchen facilities, which made the focus on primary kind of, a good place to be with this policy. That's obviously 10 years old. Yeah, There's a need for more equipment, and I think that's experienced right across the country. And one of the things that we're doing is talking across other local authorities in the rest of the country about what can they do to help support their schools to maintain adequate facilities in preparation for any further national policy developments.
So if there's capital costs as a result, whether it's something, cutlery, crockery, that sort of thing, extra tables or chairs, extra kitchen equipment, obviously there's a sort of scaling up in terms of cost. That cost automatically falls on the schools, but it may be that they could apply for some money from the GLA to cover that. That's where that stands. Is that, sorry, Katharine, you're nodding. That's the state
Yes,
of
that's
play
right.
there? Okay. And so the funding provided by the Mayor overall, is that adequate, you think?
I can answer that from the perspective of head teachers and trust CEOs that we've spoken to, and say that they certainly welcomed the fact that the rate was set at £2.65 a meal, and that then potentially influenced the decision to move the national rate to £2.53 from where it had previously been £2.41. As Barbara has mentioned, there are boroughs already topping up to £3 a meal. And there are many who feel that that's a more kind of realistic place for the cost to sit. Of course, if the per meal rate had increased in line with CPI since 2014, it would currently be at £2.87. So even the £2.65 leaves a shortfall. And so it has been the case that schools have been, and Academy Trust to some extent have been having to subsidise this, while nonetheless appreciating that the funding rate they are receiving from the Mayor is higher than the national rate.
Okay, and on the capital, so that's the revenue side. On the
Yes.
capital side, is that, you mentioned the £5 million fund, is that adequate? I don't know if we know if some, all, or more than all of that has been bid for.
I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
That might be our next panel, can probably
Yes.
answer that question for us.
I'll leave that to them.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Clark, before we go on to you, could I just ask, sorry, Assembly Member Boff, could I just ask the panel, so just a context, what effect have government cuts to local authority funding for schools had on the implementation of this? Daniel, would you like to start?
So broadly, I think the feedback we've been getting is very similar around the funding that's been made available from the LGA and so on to support the free school meal rollout in London. It's been very, very good. Ideally, we'd like to see that funding commitment to be, from government over the long term. There is a more broader problem around capital investment, the cuts to local authorities and the school estate that has, manifested a huge problem across education, not just in terms of, school kitchens, but there is much more to do from government in that regard. But I don't think that should be any barrier to what we're currently doing around free school meals.
Thank you. Assembly Member Boff, you had a question.
Just very quickly, you said some boroughs are paying £3 per meal. Perhaps you could share with us at some point which boroughs those are. It'd be interesting to see that. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on. Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I'll skip right on to question 13. Just in terms of schools, and are they managing with that amount to cater for children with special dietary needs, those meals because they need kosher or halal meals, but also because they may have special educational needs?
I can answer by saying that I know that £5 million pot of money that the GLA has made available across London is there partly to ensure that those additional costs are met, and that the two particular areas where they're aware that there are additional costs are in relation to children in special schools and children with special educational needs, and in relation to particular dietary requirements, including the high cost of kosher food compared with non-kosher food. And I know that they are using some of that money to support schools with that.
So I was just wondering if you could comment on this. One thing, so I represent Barnet and Camden, so I'm lucky to serve London's largest Jewish community. And when the free school meals program was announced, it was actually the Jewish schools who immediately got in touch, because what I hadn't realized until that point was, obviously I was aware of the high cost of kosher meals, but actually the difference is currently being made up by schools for the amount they get for the lower years, by the amount they get per meal from government. They're making that up, and it's a significant shortfall. And I'm wondering what we could do as the GLA to sort of may push the government, inspire the government to actually to realise that they also need to do an impact assessment on kosher meals, but also on meals for children with additional needs.
It's a really good point. So I think it's automatically the meal rate for kosher meals has been adjusted in light of the feedback that was received, but it is absolutely, there's no London weighting involved, there's no special meals price involved in the way school food is currently managed and funded, and that's why we, alongside about 30 organisations in the School Food Review Group, are asking the government to kind of conduct a little bit more of a root and branch review that looks at those kind of the triple pillars of quality of food being put on the plate and making sure it is adequate, it is culturally appropriate, it is sustainable. The funding systems, because there's little pots of money coming from all sorts of places, and it's very complex for schools to administer and manage. So quality and funding, and then obviously the access issue and the fact that the threshold for free school meals, benefit entitled free school meals, is sitting at £7,400 before benefits. It hasn't changed since 2018 when it was introduced. Prior to that, it was being rolled out under universal credit with no threshold. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has said there is a cliff edge, so there's a disincentive to work because you could then lose free school meal entitlement down the line. So really wanting to kind of look at that bigger review, and perhaps things like special meals and culturally appropriate food could form part of that.
Thank you, Assemblymember Clark. Assemblymember Bakari.
Thank you. I'm going to touch on pupil premium that I think everyone's mentioned already. And I was a primary school teacher when pupil premium came in under the coalition government, and it made a massive difference. It completely changed our approach in terms of helping children who have never been to a theatre before or never had, were missing out on extra educational support. So it's made a massive difference. And I know that there's been a discussion about the risk of that being lost because of the funding as a result of the Mayor's programme. Could you tell us a little bit about how the schools are making sure that doesn't happen?
I know Katharine will have a lot to say on this. So the GLA did a special webinar for schools and local authorities on pupil premium. Obviously, there is experience from universal infant free school meals and from the 4 London boroughs. So what the 4 London boroughs had been doing, who were already doing universal school meals, to make sure pupil premium enrolment was remaining high. In Hammersmith and Fulham, when they did a pilot in two secondary schools, one special school, one mainstream secondary school, they obviously had to then adopt a different process for getting parents to register for pupil premium, and incorporated it into a broader kind of information gathering exercise with parents, and resulted in an increase in pupil premium. So actually there is some evidence that if we start to handle pupil premium and registration for pupil premium differently, it could actually lead to...
Does it impact on the workload though on the staff?
It does, yeah. And the automated enrolment pilots are very time intensive and resource intensive, and I think again that's why we're trying to use that that work that's going on the ground, the piloting of this, to try and push for a more integrated system of linking pupil premium to benefits and indicators of disadvantage, so that schools can automatically access that funding. But I'll let Katharine pick up the more detail.
Thank you. I would definitely agree that there is concern amongst both primary schools and secondary schools about the potential loss of pupil premium funding. And secondary heads are quite worried about this, because if parents are not incentivised to apply for free school meals while their children are at primary school, then it could be the case that they enter secondary school and there's a big drop. I think that worry is understandable, given that about 30% of head teachers reported a drop in pupil premium funding in 2014 after the introduction of universal infant free school meals, so it's a kind of legitimate concern. And also, of course, we know that there were about 11% of children who were eligible for free school meals but not receiving it before this policy was introduced, and that gap is greater in some places than in others. And in London, actually, that gap is smaller than in lots of other places. I think that's a testament to the huge amount of work that London schools have done to make sure that families are aware of this benefit, that they are signed up for it, and that they do fill in the form. I know that schools and the GLO have worked incredibly hard to avoid a drop in pupil premium enrolments this year, and that one of the things they've done is to look at those boroughs who were already offering universal primary free school meals, Newham, Tower Hamlets, Islington and others, to learn from their good practice. And Islington was kind of one example that they looked at because they'd been particularly successful in making sure that there wasn't a drop. And we don't know yet, we don't have the data yet to know how pupil premium enrolment across the country, across London, might be affected by this scheme. And to be honest, there is some emerging data, but even when that comes through, it will be really hard to identify cause and effect. And that's also affected by the transitional protections that are currently in place, which mean that if a child was eligible for free school meals in 2018, they'll remain eligible until the end of their current phase of education. So there may be children now who are receiving that and therefore wouldn't show up even if they
was. The emphasis is on the parent to apply. So. Yes. Is that the reason why there's this kind of discrepancy between primary and secondary? Is that an issue there? So perhaps because primary schools are quite used to communicating with their parents and getting things to happen, and secondary schools this is a kind of a new thing for them, isn't it? Is that the reason why there's a difference there?
I think secondary schools are concerned because previously primary schools were, they see children first, and so they do the role around making sure that parents are aware of this, that they apply, that they know about it. And then, of course, when they enter secondary school, many families have already gone through that process, they're already in the system, and so secondary schools are concerned that if that's no longer taking place, that it could have a negative impact on them, and particularly with pupil premium eligibility, because it's about the Ever 6 measure. If a family circumstances change, it may mean that they lose out if they hadn't applied while they're at primary school, if that makes sense. So I think there is a real case here, coming back to auto-enrolment, that it would be hugely beneficial for schools, for parents, for children, I know it's complex, but if it were possible for the government to use the data that it already holds to simply make schools' funding settlements reflect the proportion of children whose families are eligible for that benefit, and put that into the school's funding, it removes then an element of stigma, because you're not identifying individual children, you're simply making sure that schools get within their funding the amount they need. It removes the need for parents to apply via the local authority or the academy trust. It removes the need for schools to do the huge amount of work they do chasing that. It removes the burden on those homeschool and family school support workers who do so much of this incredible work to support families. There will be one fewer thing for them to do. So I think that auto-enrolment could have huge benefits there.
Daniel, do you think that you've probably heard from your members about the challenges that they're having to deal with in this particular aspect, and do you think the government does have a greater role here in making that change, particularly on the enrolment element that everyone's been talking about?
I mean, absolutely. This is one piece of feedback that we are getting from our membership at the moment is that it's quite a long. The time and workload aspect is growing in this regard, and actually, I think one way to ensure that schools do recoup pupil premium funding is that commitment to a long-term investment in the programme and the rollout, with appropriate mechanisms for auto-enrolment established.
Yeah, I mean, that will be coming up in our next question, but I think that emphasis of the need for not to be just 1 year has been very loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, panel. Daniel, I recently spoke at one of your union events, and just to amplify, a lot of your members were talking about, unsurprisingly, child poverty and how important this free school meals have been. Assembly Member Bukhari set me up nicely to ask, in your view, could the government change the rules so that schools could access pupil premium funding without parents having to register for free school meals?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, We need long-term commitment to free school meals programme nationally. I mean, what we'd seen in London for 1 year, we'd love to see rolled out throughout the country, but there absolutely does need to be then a mechanism for auto-enrolment to ensure that, parents and families can access the benefits they're entitled to, but also that schools can recoup valuable pupil premium money to ensure that adequate education can be provided.
Yeah. That's loud and clear, thank you. Would you like to see universal free school meals introduced to primary schools as a long-term programme?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't emphasise enough the benefits of high-quality free school meals for young people in terms of the social aspects that it allows children to develop. There were previous questions around young people with special educational needs having specialised food. Actually, I think in schools that I've worked in where there are young people who are, fussy about food and, don't want to try things, there's no better environment than the school lunch hall to get children trying new things, experiencing new foods. And when you have high quality provision, it has a real benefit to those young people. So, when you've got young people who, will only eat a certain type of food, they soon develop a wide repertoire. Of course, it really absolutely impacts on the learning of young people. Quite simply, hungry children cannot learn at all, and to alleviate that burden and help young people improve attainment is something that we should all be aiming to do. But absolutely, that universalism, the removal of stigma, and to allow every child to sort of experience education and live in some dignity throughout the school day, I think is something that we should aspire to.
Thank you. And finally, Daniel, if this doesn't continue and it drops off for whatever reason, what impact would that have on parents, schools and children if this scheme just finished?
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, when there was a free school meals scheme in Newham, and there was a protest from parents. All parents, I think, value free school meals. They can see absolute benefit, and it's great to hear about some experiences of Assembly members going to schools and speaking to those parents. But also, I think there is that real economic argument that is just not made enough. I don't think. We often hear from a national government viewing children as almost burdens, and we often hear around feckless parents and work shy people, and it's just wrong. Poverty is a political choice that impacts on every single one of us, and if we are to see a prospering economy and a growing Britain, investing in children, and it has to be the starting point. And the fact of the matter is, how rich in nutrition their daily intake of food is a real determining factor in their outcomes over the long term.
Thank you. I think you're all also making really good arguments for a universal basic income, but I won't go there because the chair will throw the gavel at me. And Barbara, I can see you want to come in.
I agree with everything Daniel's saying, and I think one of the things that I want to emphasise is those impacts that we see on physical health. They become greater the longer the child is exposed to the policy, and that's very, very clear. We do believe it is the responsibility of national government to step in. There is a postcode lottery now across the UK. We can see other councils who don't have the resources of London wanting to move forward. So in Stockport, they're doing an enhanced entitlement project because they can't afford universalism. I believe that what we should be looking at is a progressive roadmap. So it can't be brought in overnight. I think there are logistical challenges, but I think you could look at a phased programme. We are seeing now disparities across the UK, with Scotland and Wales rolling out universal primary, and Scotland saying that they will go further once they achieve that model. Ireland has also, so the Republic of Ireland has also committed to universal primary and a commission to explore full universalism. So I would like to see us get rid of the term free in free school meals. They're not free. free. Somebody does pay for them, but they could be part of a virtuous economy that is about a really vibrant catering industry providing good jobs, that we could be linking a school meal system into support for British farmers, feeding into that system their potatoes and their carrots. So there's more that we can do. I think everybody agrees that schools are a learning, a place where we want children to learn about good food. And if there's not good food on the plate, or if there's a divisive system, then we need to address that. And I think we've got huge potential through a kind of a different vision for school food that isn't about only giving a meal to a child if they'll go hungry. It's about good food as part of good learning, and good food as part of achieving and investing in that future. So absolutely, I think we would love to see this programme at least extended for another year or two, if that is possible. So whilst we try and push for that kind of broader policy shift, but also to give this programme a real chance of bedding down some good nutrition and supporting families, because the cost of living, I think there's 23.4% of households with children still living with food insecurity. It is slowly, the curve is slightly changing, but it's going to be still very high in a year's time.
I think what you're saying about that holistic approach is so important and links to my final question. So for a long time, I've been advocating for plant-based foods within schools. We know this both reduces chronic health diseases, it reduces the climate impact, and it reduces bills too. I wrote to the mayor last year asking him to sign a plant-based treaty, and sadly he refused to do so. However, I think this is because he said it wasn't in his power. Do you think this is something in his power, if we're giving free school meals, to look at working with organisations like yourself or ProVeg, who have been advocating for this in schools, for the mayor to recommend that schools are moving towards at least plant-based food as a default while still offering other options?
I think there needs to be a lot of work with communities, because we also want families to take up school meals. So what you don't want is to kind of push a top-down policy and then families start to opt out again. I think that's what we need to see. I think absolutely we need to be aligning school food and public procurement with our broader climate ambitions. There's the London government procurement, so good procurement system that lots of London boroughs, and we're also pushing for the mayor to kind of encourage boroughs, this funding to be aligned with that green procurement programme. So that could be about scaling up the amount of plant-based food, but also not scaling up it in a way that is an increase in ultra-processed vegan foods. I think there is something which is about making sure that is also, this is good solid protein, increase in vegetables and fruit in the diet. And I think financially we could be also scaling back a few of the sugary desserts that are still allowed in school food standards in order to make that better, holistic, nutritious food the core of what is the offer in our schools as well.
I think healthy plant-based food co-design with communities is something we can all get behind, or me certainly. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Assemblymember Garrett.
Thanks. I'm not sure I can get behind getting rid of sugary school pudding. Surely that's the whole point of the setup. Anyway, I was going to, just on a sort of slightly different question, really, sort of looking at the bigger picture. We've been looking a lot at, well, not a lot, exclusively at lunches, but, in the context of hunger, there's also obviously discussion around breakfasts. And I wondered, in a world of finite resource, what research there is, we know, between lunches and breakfasts and the relative merits of one or the other. And I'm sure you're going to say, let's do both, which is obviously the easy mode option. But if there are difficult choices to make between those two, is there any evidence, do we know one way or the other, which would be better or maybe equally good? Katharine?
I was just going to say that we don't have that evidence in this country, and there is some evidence from overseas, but it's not completely clear, and so I think more research is needed there.
Not a well-researched question.
Yeah. I don't know that there's comparative evidence about which is better, because I think, like school lunches, school breakfasts have been of varying quality and nutritional value, and that sometimes there's actually been some quite bad practice in very sugary items that give children a bit of a sugar hit and then they slump. There is some very good evidence that a balanced, nutritious breakfast does lead to improvements in classroom performance in attainment. So Magic Breakfast and the National School Breakfast Programme have got some good, strong evidence for a school breakfast. I think in secondary schools we've got a particular challenge where, you know, children might arrive at the very last minute in school, and so the delivery of a breakfast, so the children who take up the breakfast club are not always the children that you most want to take up that offer, and they might arrive a little bit late, and then they will then be very hungry at break time, and they'll eat lots of kind of not very nutritious food from the break time offer, and then they won't then take up their lunch. So we do have to look across the school day, and the School Food Review is saying let's look at school food across the school day, including before school and after school clubs. But I think, you know, it is right that if children arrive at the start of the day without a breakfast, they are going to struggle through the day. But likewise, if they get to lunchtime and they've not had anything, then we do really need them to take up a nutritious lunch. And things like fruit and vegetable intake and protein intake are much more likely to come through a school lunch than something that is probably going to be a bit of a grab and go at breakfast time for children to be able to get hold of it at the point when they arrive.
I see, yeah, so that's the issue, perhaps the unstated assumption there. So there's a sort of defined quality of what maybe putting aside a packed lunch, but certainly a cooked lunch is, whereas a breakfast could be almost anything, just a croissant maybe.
Yeah,
that's the
or
issue,
a muffin,
with the research.
And you know, Magic Breakfast have a kind of a fortified bagel type offer, which has got like a much more slow release of energy and is protein enriched. So there are some examples of how that can be delivered, kind of very cost effectively, very simply, without too many burdens on the school. So yeah, ideally, I know some parties have committed to breakfast rollout as well as lunch. But for us, in terms of nutrition and that solid nutritional safety net in the middle of the day at school, we do feel that is the absolute number one part of the school meal system we need to crack.
Understood. Okay, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Daniel, or if not, great. If not, that's me done. Thanks, Chair. Oh.
Yes.
Will the universal school meals programme for pupils, primary pupils, will that end the need to focus on those in particular need?
I think
requirements of that.
I don't think any one intervention.
We won't have to bother anymore.
Absolutely not. No, I mean we do. You know, as Katharine said, that families in need are coming with multiple sort of issues of deprivation. So children in my school, it's cramped living conditions. There are also things to do with ability to afford uniforms. So no, it's not. I think it's one part of a bigger jigsaw, but a really important one. And I think the evidence at the Children's Food Campaign, we work with a wide range of public health specialists, and the evidence shows that good nutrition in those early years is absolutely critical for that lifetime.
This will solve that, won't it, in terms of nutrition?
It will certainly make a huge impact, and it will be a very significant contribution. But we would also argue that we do need to address other cash-based support, wage systems for families living in poverty, and we would always argue that in terms of poverty.
Sorry, I don't understand that. You argue for...
So I think poverty is multidimensional, Andrew. So we do need to have cash-based systems. So whether that's benefits, wage levels, to address poverty, we need to address things to do with rental costs in London. Yeah. So obviously school meals are not going to solve those issues for us. What they are going to do, very clearly and very powerfully, is provide that nutritional safety net in the midst of this situation that will enable children to learn and hopefully achieve more and hopefully have a more holistic educational experience here in London, and that's why we absolutely back what the Mayor's doing.
So if we're going to still have to focus on the nutritional needs of children after the implementation of universal free school meals, then what value is universal free school meals?
immense value, as we've all been talking about. So we can see its contribution to increasing fruit and vegetable uptake. We're living in an era of high levels of childhood obesity, and obesity affects children of all backgrounds.
Are schools not already doing that?
It's not, schools are doing a huge amount, but they can only do what's within their means, and at the moment their means doesn't allow them. In London, temporarily for this year, it is allowing primary schools to do this, but schools can only do what's within their means. Obviously, we need a bit of a system-wide approach to this well.
So when surely those funds, just got to ask the questions. Surely those funds that are going towards subsidising the wealthier families could be better redirected in supporting those families that are having severe problems.
The families who are particularly affected, as Daniel said, are the working poor who are currently not eligible, and we're seeing high levels of food insecurity happening by people, and same with food banks. So characterising the people that this policy is benefiting as being the wealthy is not correct.
But wealthy people will benefit from this policy. Policy, won't they?
In the way that wealthy families benefit from an education system that is free at the point of access, and this is an anomaly.
£400 a year is going to buy a good bottle of claret, isn't it? For the
Assembly Member Bob, I think we have actually addressed this in the first part of this meeting, and we've had evidence after pieces of evidence
I think Daniel
to show.
Wanted to say
That's
something.
Right. I mean,
Daniel wanted to comment as well.
Daniel, please.
I mean, odd bins in
Sorry, Assembly Member Boff, could the panellists answer your question, please?
So, Assembly Member Boff, I think it's really important to recognise that just because a policy doesn't completely alleviate the burden of poverty from young people, that we shouldn't take steps towards alleviating poverty from young people. The fact of the matter is, and I've worked in schools like this, 1 in 5 schools is also a food bank at the moment. So, providing universal free school meals is not going to end the food crisis that many families have to endure. Many of families will still be having to access food support from outside, many accessing school-based food banks. And as has been said, we need systems in place to assist with the cost and expense of school uniforms. There's some policies that would be very helpful in regards to that, ensuring that families don't have to pay for branded things that are excessive. There's lots that we can talk about, but it is a multifaceted approach that is needed, and as has been said, the majority of families who are in poverty at the moment are working. The real underlying issues, and I don't think it's I don't think there's much any of us in this room can do about it. Currently, are low pay, precarious work.
Can I just say, we're all caricaturing here. The idea that I'm caricatured as saying nobody should get school meals and we should sod the poor is ridiculous. Because actually I think there is something to be done with the resources that are available to address the serious poverty that's in London, and anybody who's consulted my record knows that that's the case. But it's this idea of universality which implicitly has wasted costs, it's wasted resources on things that could be addressing the real root causes of poverty in London. And now that's what I want an answer to. Is it worth the price, bearing in mind that money is limited? Is it worth the cost of neglecting other programs that could come around with those resources in order to provide the kids of the wealthy with a subsidy?
There is a cost of means testing. There is a cost of the extra bureaucracy that brings. It isn't, the socialists or, who are putting forward data like PricewaterhouseCoopers that for every £1 we spend, you get £1.71 return to the economy. That's what you should be listening to.
Well, there were misguided capitalists too.
Okay, thank you. And on that note, can I? And you know, asking the same question, expecting a different answer from this panel, I think is a tough one. What I'm going to do now is bring this part of the investigation today to a close. I would like to thank our panellists for your incredibly interesting answers. I thought that it was personally as chair a really interesting session, and of course committee for the questions that you've asked. So thank you very much, and I'm going to we'll have a few minutes break, and then we will have our new panellists in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for joining us for the second part of today's Economy Committee meeting today. Welcome back, everyone. We'll now move on to our second panel on free school meals in London. We're joined by a panellist, Joanne McCartney, who is the Deputy Mayor for Children and Families, Emma Pawson, Head of Health and Programme Director for Free School Meals at the Greater London Authority, and Richard Watts, Deputy Chief of Staff for the Greater London Authority. So if we could start with our first question, Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. And this is for anyone on the panel. Why did the Mayor take the decision to provide universal free school meals to all primary school children rather than targeting provision at all children, including secondary schools, on lower incomes?
So shall I answer that? So two reasons. Firstly, there is an overwhelmingly strong evidence base for universal primary free school meals. You will be aware, and I know you may have gone into it in the last session, that we are not the first people to do this, or we are the first people to roll this out at the scale that we have rolled it out. But this goes back to Labour government funded pilots in Newham and Durham that also, as I recall, and Emma, correct me if I'm wrong, looked at the evidence base around extending eligibility but not making it universal, and found overwhelmingly the benefits from a universal approach outweighed the approaches of extending eligibility but not making it universal. So there's an academic evidence base around universality that's very strong. There's also, given the time period with which we had to roll this out, a very strong administrative argument for universality, because if you're doing this, you still have to count pupils eligible under the national rules for pupil premium purposes. It would be catastrophic to not do that. So you need to do a means test, whatever you do, to then have to do another separate new London-wide means test would be extreme. There is not the same level of kind of national support and policy-making support for, would be extremely administratively burdensome for schools, and therefore, the joy of universality is that once you've done the necessary national bureaucracy that everyone has to do, then everyone gets it and it's easy. So I think from our point of view, it was better to spend money on food provision than introducing yet another separate new means testing programme, and that's why we made the decision we did.
Yeah. Can I also add to that research also shows that the earlier you can intervene with children, the better. So we do know from the research that the benefits from universal free school meals carries on with a child throughout their school life and into adulthood in terms of better health, but also better educational attainment as well. So I think putting it at the younger age group was also a good idea too.
Great. We've been hearing from the previous panel about some of the challenges, and one of the challenges have been, that you just mentioned pupil premium and the schools not wanting to lose out on that because of the need for parents to apply themselves. And one of the things that they kept on talking about was the automatic enrolment scheme. And I think that that was something that maybe the Mayor could have considered. And was that considered? And did you, what was the decision-making process? Was it the challenges? Was it the difficulties in getting that to happen?
I think I'll let Richard go first, because Richard was one of the council leaders that initially introduced universal free school meals in a borough. But so this is something that's got to be done, I think, at a borough level, working with their schools, because they know those boroughs best. But one of the things we've done throughout this process is to take advice from the boroughs that already have it including those boroughs that have a model of universal registration of all parents. And we've been sharing those that good evidence in webinars and with our formal meetings, as well as producing resources that illustrate those models. So, for example, Lewisham has now trialled an auto-enrolment system, and they've identified an extra 500 families through the data they already have in their own systems. And they've informed parents that they will apply on their behalf unless parents opt out. And they believe they will get approximately £1.2 million extra in pupil premium in this next year.
Yeah, we were hearing that from the schools, but can we just focus on the automatic enrolment? If you can tell me about
Certainly. So, as Joanne says, ultimately it is a borough decision about how they wish to approach that. The strong advice we gave to boroughs was to run a auto-enrolment system, and we arranged training and webinars from boroughs like Islington, who have previously run that kind of system, and as Joanne found a number of, found quite a lot of children who were entitled to free school meals but were previously not claiming them, that actually upped pupil premium income as opposed to it dropping off. But ultimately it's for boroughs to run that. It's both important from a administrative point of view and a devolution point of view that the boroughs needed to adapt their own systems to implement this within their own school setting. And therefore,
so you think if it was a national government approach, they'd still have to do it in that way, do you think?
Well, I think if it's a national government approach, the government can just change the rules because they have access to the Universal Credit Database, so they could do it differently. We don't have that data, boroughs don't have that data, so they have to do the approach that they do. But auto-enrolment is clearly our recommendation to boroughs about the best way to implement this.
Okay. All right, thanks.
No, I think since when we initially did the engagement with boroughs around that approach being part of the grant principles, there was a mixed reaction, so we felt it wasn't appropriate to mandate it. It's not something we would mandate for a borough. We did reach out to national government, and I think it's something they've looked at and haven't adopted as a more national approach, and that's interesting in itself. But since we have been doing this, as Joanne's just mentioned, some of the boroughs that have been doing this and looking at ways in which they can do auto-enrolment, they've started to see massive success. We've had one example. We've had another example of a borough who's found another 600 families who are now eligible for free school meals who didn't know that they were. So just going through this process, we're getting more and more boroughs come on board. Just from one of our webinars again, and we'll be running another one in the next couple of weeks to share that good practice. And as we go over this year, I expect more and more boroughs will adopt it as a policy.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, panellists, could I ask you to move your microphones closer to you, please? Thank you. Thank you. Assembly Member Garrett.
Hi, morning. Actually, just on the decision, a question I put to the previous panel was about sort of lunch versus breakfast. There seems to be evidence that lunch helps, evidence that breakfast helps. Obviously, you went down the lunch route. Did you review the alternative of breakfast, or did you weigh that up, or was that just too complicated or too difficult, or not on the menu, as it were? Sorry.
Boom, boom. Very good. We did look at it. The reason we went for lunch was, again, because there was very strong evidence of its effectiveness, which isn't to say breakfast clubs aren't effective, and we really welcome where that is being rolled out. However, what you have with school lunches is an existing infrastructure. Many of these things, there are already kitchens, many of these meals are being served, they're being served at pace, there's an ability for schools to cope with that. Most school breakfast clubs are significantly smaller, and therefore you're having to do a much bigger administrative burden on schools to shift a breakfast club from typically 30 kids to like 250 for lunches, where you're already getting larger numbers of schools going through. So the conscious of the administrative burden on schools in a very difficult period, look, we took the view, and I think that the feedback reflects this, that lunches would have been a significantly easier programme to administer, which isn't to say where breakfast clubs exist that they aren't of value. We really welcome that.
Yeah, understood. So actually on that point about infrastructure in for lunches, obviously one of the discussions that we had earlier as well was about so you pay the revenue cost of the extra lunch, the marginal cost, if you like, of the extra lunch, but then there's certain tipping points where you need extra capital. I mean, there's extra capital in terms of maybe tables and chairs and cutlery and knives and forks and things, crockery rather. But then you can get to certain tipping points, so maybe the room isn't big enough, and you have to significantly rethink the way that they did like the lunch shift. And we heard earlier about how that's a challenge in some schools. How did you address that challenge, and what support did you give to schools? And have you had feedback that schools have obviously some have struggled with that? Are they now all beyond the struggling phase?
Yeah, I'll come to Emma in a second, but I think there's a difference between primary and secondary, because in primary schools have to seat all children anyway, so they've already got very sophisticated systems for getting children in at different times, and it's like a military operation in effect to get them all in and then out. So I don't think that there's been that same issue that there would have been if it was perhaps in secondary schools. Initially, I mean, we did hear earlier that it is an issue. Yeah. Like, for example, the number of, dispensing hot meals is different. So you could just, if you're doing packed lunches, you could do that in a classroom.
If you're doing hot meals, you have to do that somewhere near the canteen.
Yeah.
So that does increase the number of kids going through that bit.
Yeah, but generally, I think in most primary schools, children do tend to eat together, although they might have separate packed lunch tables as opposed to school dinner tables. But very early on, we were getting quite a lot of concern about exactly those things. But actually, I think boroughs and schools have just got on with it and have adapted what they already have. I mean, I think Zach and myself went on a cost of living working group to a school where they'd done exactly that. They just adapted what they already have, and they hadn't had any issues at all. But Emma, I don't know if you want to add.
Thank you, Joanne. I think I'd add to that at the start, we were getting concerns coming through, but that hasn't really been seen in fruition. When we looked at the boroughs who were already offering this, so the 5 boroughs in London who already were doing universal free school meals, and heard from them actually they tackled most of these problems in very, very creative ways. We then shared that with the other boroughs so they could learn from that, which I think they found really helpful. The other thing which I'd flag is that the formula that we've used for funding is very flexible. There is surplus in there, partly because we used 2022 census data, which means that when we look at 2023, unfortunately, there are more children who are now living in poverty and therefore eligible for government funding. So we took an agreement in the GLA that we would keep the higher point, and therefore boroughs have got more money than children. We also funded them at a 90% uptake rate, and we expect that there will be a gradual uptake to get to that point. And in some schools, they may not quite reach that, and therefore, again, there's extra flexibility in the funding. So we've been as supportive and as flexible as possible. We also have got a contingency pot if there are any schools that are having extreme problems, but we haven't seen that come through to us yet.
So you're confident you haven't, because obviously, I mean, the answer I got earlier was that the cost of those, of the sort of the extra infrastructure, if you like, the extra capacity would fall automatically on schools, but there was some funding from the GLA that might cover it. You're confident that you haven't, so the potential there is that it's a sort of a white elephant gift in the sense that you get the gift and then there's a cost that you have to pay yourself to go with it. You're confident that you haven't imposed a burden like that on schools?
We've got a number of touch points throughout the year to talk to head teachers. So because there are so many of them, if there are voices that we're not hearing, then we will hear those at several points throughout the year. We have been also having regular engagement with boroughs. So we've been around all of the boroughs and spoke to them to see how things are going. We've not heard anything come up. There are 1 or 2 boroughs who have invested. They've been fantastic in their kitchens, but they are because of long-standing issues that they've got, not because of something that we've created.
So you're confident you haven't put a cost burden onto schools?
At the moment, that's not the evidence that we've heard.
Okay.
The money goes to boroughs, though, not to schools, so our agreement sits with the boroughs. If the boroughs are not
understood, okay,
doing the contracting with the schools, that's something that our relationship in terms of contracting and funding is with the boroughs.
Okay, well, so there's a potential wrinkle in terms of you're funding the boroughs, and then if the boroughs are not dealing, is it then the boroughs who are dealing with these practical issues with schools? Okay, but you're confident that to whatever extent that there was a problem, it's been dealt with by schools and boroughs.
So I think first things first. This was a big policy shift, and I think the Mayor would like to thank London school community for the way they've responded so positively to all of this. It's an incredible job of work London schools have done, and I think they enormous thanks and credit are due to them for that. I think second, as we have deliberately designed this as this was a one-off early intervention. Costing it is not a precise science, because as you're right to say, Assembly Member Garrett, that there is a risk that if you just try to penny pinch and just look at the precise marginal extra cost of school and cost it on that basis, you're at risk of missing unintended consequences and missing marginal extra costs that schools face. So we've effectively, as a one-year policy intervention, overfunded boroughs deliberately in order to give some margin in the system to manage low costs like bit of cutlery here, bit of crockery there. Clearly, we are reliant on, and this is right in my view, boroughs to do that implementation with their schools. They have that relationship with their schools already. I think it's not for the GLA to try and come and usurp the borough relationship with schools using this policy as a mechanism to do that. I think it's a sign of maturity in the London government system that cross-party, cross-borough, that this has been universally, a very professional job has been done by boroughs of implementing this, and enormous thanks due to all boroughs, I think, for their work on that. So we design, so we've designed it to show flexibility, to have some spare cash in the system deliberately to smooth implementation. We are determined, and the Mayor's already said this, that no school should be out of pocket from all of this. So we are, we've got that, we're paying at 90% take up, but we have designed into the system, in the event that any school or any borough gets more than 90% take up, that there is a way of claiming back some of those expenses towards the end of the year. Although I have to say that in itself was designed to be a deliberately generous estimate of take up, because when Peterborough happened to know well, Islington did it. Take up was averaging around 85% when this was a mature, when this policy had matured.
Okay, actually, just I think my final question. We were speaking earlier about the fund you were just referring to. I think it's a £5 million pot of sort of I guess. Well, you tell me. I got the sense that it was money that could be applied for in order to help cover those costs. So, what's the sort of take up on that £5 million been? Has it been oversubscribed, undersubscribed?
We've used the information that's come out of our equalities impact assessment as our starting point, and within there identified that there is a higher cost associated with certain meals, whether that's Send or Jewish food, kosher food. We've paid that out, or that will be going out in the borough's grant claim, I think, in April. So that's already been allocated. We are still, as I say, we're going around the boroughs.
So is that one of the things from that extra money?
Yeah.
Okay, that extra £5 million is covering things like that.
We've also had a recent unfortunate instance where we've got an influx of pupils because of extreme circumstances in the world. We'll be making sure that that is covered as well through this fund. We've been round, as I mentioned before, all boroughs doing check-ins. Nothing has come up at the moment, but we've kept it open. We have 6 weekly check-ins with them. As and when things come up, absolutely, we'll be considering that on a case-by-case basis.
So of the £5 million, roughly, how much of that is allocated, spent, left over?
Currently at the moment, for the Send pupils costs and the kosher food and the influx of pupils, about a third of it so far is allocated at this point.
Okay. Oh, I see. So in that case, I've misunderstood. I do apologise. So the sense I got earlier was that the £5 million was available, let's say, for people, schools that needed extra tables or something and didn't have the capacity. So it isn't for that. It's for where there are certain special sorts of meals that cost more than the standard amount.
It's for any extreme circumstance that may inhibit a child being able to access that, whether that was through something that was identified in the equalities impact assessment, or as we go round, if something is happening with a school where they're struggling. But we haven't had that come up yet in any of our round of engagements, and we've been doing a lot of engagement with schools, with head teachers, with boroughs.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Boff.
The £5 million contingency is in 2 tranches. There's a 905,000 for supporting individuals, and then there's 4,095,000 to support schools. However, that's over a 2-year period, and that 905,000 for supporting individuals disappears in 2024-25, but the amount of money for supporting schools carries on until the following year. Why is that?
Because the money to support individuals from that has been where we have identified through the equalities impact assessment groups of people who, for primarily religious reasons, feel excluded from the state school system, and where this is primarily the Haredi Jewish community, particularly being identified in Haringey and Barnet in North London, where we decided we need to do something to support that community separately.
Don't forget the Haredis in Hackney. They'll be very upset.
Forgive me, Hackney as well. In fact, primarily in Hackney, where we decided we need to do something separate for that, to support that community, to ensure some degree of equality outside of the school system. So that is a 1-year programme for this financial year. The reason it runs between 2 GLA financial years is in schools is because we're funding it for this academic year, which doesn't unfortunately align to the GLA's financial year. So that's why it runs over 2 GLA financial years.
That's the 4 million goes over 2 years.
Yeah, because the funding's aligned to the academic year, not the financial year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, panel. If I can start with you, Deputy Mayor. What feedback have you received from schools and parents on the delivery of the programme since the start of the school year, and have they identified any challenges, and if so, what have you done about this?
Okay, well, I think we've sort of dealt with a lot of the challenges we perhaps would have expected haven't actually really arisen, but it's gone remarkably well, so the feedback has been extremely positive. I think Emma can talk a little bit more, but we set up a programme, a partnership group with boroughs, and I think they are extremely keen and enthused about this programme, and I think that enthusiasm has increased as the programme has gone on. And what we're doing is building into this year is regular insight work with different groups, so with head teachers, with parents and with children, for example. So we should have the first formal insights next month, which we can happily share with the committee. Obviously, we've done visits to schools, so I went with you to one where we've talked to head teachers, catering staff, parents and pupils, and it has been overwhelmingly positive. And Emma, I don't know if you want to say anything extra about some of the insight work and the feedback you've been getting.
Thanks, Joanne. If you'll bear with me, I'm just going to read a couple of lines from a letter that we've had from a parent, which gives you a flavour of just some of the things that we're getting into the team. So this says, "Dear Mayor Khan, I couldn't believe when the school let me know that the meals are for free. I'm a recent single mother of 2. I live with my elderly mother, but I'm also a paediatric nurse and I'm trying to improve my life by doing study. It has been a huge struggle. You cannot believe how my life has improved since I do not have to prepare the meals for the children. Not only does it save me time, but it saves me money. Thank you for your kindness, for you and your team." We've had so many of those come through to us as we've been going around doing the insights work with the boroughs, as we've been talking to head teachers. The overwhelming response has been phenomenally positive. I've never worked on a policy where it's been adopted by all boroughs across London. We've heard from all schools are doing this. We've got only one school that's got a slight logistical issues at the moment, but the fact that we've got nearly 1,900 or over 1,900 primary schools now doing this in such a short space of time, I think is testament to itself. As Joanne has just said, we're making sure that we've got a lot of work going through our monitoring and evaluation throughout the year, regular touch points, insights work going on. Some of it will be independent to make sure that we are hearing from people actually the experience that they are having throughout the year, and if necessary we'll adopt and adapt as we go.
Thank you. And just to echo, when I went to visit with Joanne, just how pleased the teachers and parents and students were with the food. They had some niggly problems, but I'm sure those are being resolved. But overwhelmingly, the narrative was that this had been a really good thing. Could I ask you about specific dietary requirements, so particularly for, I suppose I'll stick with you, Emma, with for religious needs or specifically dietary requirements, kind of how you've approached that?
Thank you. It's something that we did look at very carefully, and that was also one of the reasons why we commissioned the EQIA, which was published quite early on in the policy development cycle. Within there, it did identify that there was a higher cost, as I mentioned before, with kosher food, and therefore we took the policy decision to top that up. So we've topped up state-funded Jewish schools 85p, so they are funded above the other rate that we've paid other schools. Within the EQIA, we did a lot of engagement with faith groups, with faith schools, to look at whether this would meet their needs. We did follow national government policy around national food standards, and we took the decision not to do anything bespoke because that would be extremely confusing for people. We didn't have time. So everything that's done by schools and by boroughs is within line with the national government standards for school food. We also spoke to a range of other faith leaders to make sure that this was meeting dietary requirements, and that was the feedback that we got, that it was. That, you know, halal is always catered for by schools if there's need. Vegetarian, vegan is always part of a main offer as well.
Thank you. And then finally, I may have mentioned this before, but I've been working with an organisation I'm meeting with called ProVeg, who are looking particularly at healthy plant-based foods within school. They've worked with over 5,000 schools across England and Wales. And their argument really is that this lowers chronic health disease, lowers bills and lowers climate budget. I put them in touch with your team. I'm just wondering if you could give us any update on if there's been any progress.
I can find out if we've done work with them. We have been running webinars to look at the sustainability angle, which brings in the vegan and vegetarian options. As I mentioned, all of our policy is in line with the national government food standards, and that's where we have talked to boroughs about doing it. We're meeting the organisation that you've just mentioned. We are meeting them soon, so that's in the diary, and thank you so much for connecting us as well. And I know that Councillor Boff has mentioned vegan foods to us before. We're running a good practice session with the food board in the next, I think it's the next 4 weeks, where we are also sharing more and more good practice, and we're bringing in organisations, as you just mentioned, and looking at where we can share resources. A lot of that is also on our resource hub, so boroughs and schools can access that if they can't get to one of our webinars or one of our meetings as well.
Thank you. I know something Pro-Veg often talk about, and it's something I talk about a lot too, is that this is slightly different to vegan, because vegan comes with a set of moral choices. I'm vegan myself, but actually plant-based food is nothing necessarily to do with those choices, just to do with healthy options that happen to be vegan, but it's not about veganism. Anyway, I can see you nodding.
I mean, noted. The thing I would say is, because we took a very deliberate decision at the beginning of this that it was going to be a big enough administrative job to the education system in London to get this out full stop. So we weren't going to add extra criteria. So, you know, in the complex devolution settlement there is around education, whilst we are funding this, schools have individual responsibility for their catering contracts and stuff like that. Boroughs sometimes, but not university, offer a central catering contract schools can choose to buy into if they wish, but individual school governors, of which I am one and know other people will be here as well, kind of have got the ultimate legal responsibility for ensuring each school meets government's nutritional criteria. There are no nutritional criteria for academies because they are exempt from that as part under academy freedoms, so-called, and we deliberately chose to not do anything that added to like the criteria around that we are doing. So we have deliberately not chosen to intervene on the nature of this food that is served, given the complexities of doing this and the cost of doing that already. So wholly understanding the points everyone wishes to make around this as an issue, we have taken the call that to date, and while this remains a one-year programme, that it's kind of beyond our responsibility to start questioning the nature of the food that's served beyond ensuring everyone hits their legal requirements.
You've set me off slightly. It's like you put 50p in the meter. The Mayor talks about lots of things around 2030 net zero target, and often they're not entirely in his power, and it's about that leadership. And there are things, particularly around procurement, that are in his power, and I've often had those conversations, and most of the time I'd say he accepts those arguments. Surely if universal free school meals is to be extended, this is an example where the Mayor, in hitting his net zero targets, can show leadership by encouraging or at least nudging schools to make more appropriate choices for meeting net zero while co-designing those with communities for healthy food.
I wholly accept your point around nudging schools, and I think that is exactly why we're doing those kind of training seminars and that kind of awareness raising, so I think that point's wholly accepted. I'm sure we'll come to the question of whether this policy is extended or not, to which I can preempt that by saying we don't yet know if it is financially possible for the GLA to do that. In a more sane world where every local and regional government had a multi-year spending settlement to give us more predictability, we would then have the kind of multi-year view that allows us to go down that more with more clarity.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Emma, you've sort of partly answered this incidentally, but I'm just wondering, what steps have you taken to ensure that schools do not lose out on pupil premium funding as a result of this programme?
We've been doing a lot of work. It was one of the things that during our engagement with boroughs and with school teachers, that they were concerned about. So I'll give you some examples of things we've been doing. We've held a number of good practice webinars where we've shared with them what auto-enrolment means in practice, where the boroughs who've done it, what was their experience, how did they do it, so the process that they went through. We're taking a very close eye. We're monitoring the pupil premium data that DfE produce. We don't think until December's data cut that we'll be able to see the impact of the work that we've been doing with the boroughs. We have seen, as I mentioned, where it has worked, the number of families, I was quite shocked actually by the number of families who've been identified through that process who were eligible for government funding that didn't know they were. Yeah. We've also done letters in our directly to parents, and in there we've highlighted the need, if you are eligible, please keep registering. We've translated all our materials into different languages to make sure that there is no language barrier for people not understanding that as well. So as much as we can, we've been really empowering boroughs, explaining how they can do it and looking at how we can encourage them to do this as well.
I think it's worth saying in all of this, there are two fundamental problems with the national eligibility system around free school meals that we are trying to address. Number one is that because free school meals is a out-of-work benefit, effectively, that there are many, many families under the poverty line or close to the poverty line who don't qualify for it. Yeah. The second is that there are only families who do qualify it who don't know, or for whatever reason, fear of official forms, language issues, whatever it is, choose not to claim. So, you know, there is a significant problem with the national policy. It's not a criticism of this government. It wasn't changed under governments of previous parties either. But, you know, that is one of the policy reasons why we thought this was a priority for limited public money in this very difficult set of economic circumstances for people.
Okay, great. And then finally for me, when the mayoral decision was published, it said that the Equalities Impact Assessment would be published in July 2023. Why was there a delay into the publication of the Equalities Assessment? Was that?
Yeah, the Equalities Impact Assessment was published early in the summer, yeah.
Okay, well the question must be, okay, sorry about that. Thank you.
Sorry, I think we're talking about the Integrated Impact Assessment. Yes.
Yes, the EQIA is different from the IIA.
Yeah. It's okay.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, Assembly Member Boff.
I have a few questions on the that was covered, the evidence base in the independent impact assessment. One's the most trivial, really. Perhaps you should address it. According to this, on the Equalities Impact Assessment, it says that LGBTQ plus parents or guardians are more likely to be economically constrained than heterosexual parents. Where'd you get that from? Where did the pink pound disappear to?
So the EQIA was done by an independent organisation called Arup. We took their evidence and that's what was in the EQIA.
I'll address it to Arup. Okay. We talked about stigma. There is, you said currently schools are, those schools which already have universal free school meals have programs for completing forms in relation to the pupil's premium. How is that being shared, that their tactics for improving the take-up of pupil premium, how is that being shared amongst the boroughs? Because that was one of the objectives in the independent impact assessment.
I can repeat what I've answered before, if that's helpful. So
well,
we've done
I'm sorry, did I miss? I apologise if I missed it. But you're convening a group, and that's active at the moment. That's all I needed to know.
Yeah, we've run a number of webinars which are available as recorded,
right.
etc.
Yeah. So that's pupil premium. There was others as well. 905K. I'm sorry about this. Also in there, you talked about the inability. There we go. Sorry. You talked about convening the boroughs and schools to encourage more sustainable transport and delivery strategies. Has that been done?
We've got a joint session which is being organised alongside or with the London Food Board team. That's being planned for the next couple of weeks. I haven't got the date in front of me.
You've got it. It's underway. Yeah. That's all. And there is also potential for, one of the things that was identified was the potential for increased waste, and that the food group should convene and share good practice. Has that been done?
I can double check that is part of the criteria, but that's what we've planned into this session that's happening. We also have got an independent evaluation going on that will look at what the IIA findings showed us to be able to monitor that as we go. So it's a little bit of an unknown for us at the moment, but that's what we've asked our independent evaluation to look at.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely in there, saying that you should convene that and share good practice on that. But you're not sure if it's underway.
I don't know if it's part of the agenda for the next joint session with the Food Board, but we've also got another 6 months to do this as this policy continues into the next financial year, so it won't end until September.
Okay.
So we've only been running a couple of months.
Yes. Yeah, but you need to capture data.
Shall we write you with clarification?
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, otherwise it's a lot too far. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we just go back to these two different assessments, because we're just a bit unclear about the answer here. So could you just explain, so the integrated impact assessment and the equalities impact assessment, what dates were they both published, please?
The EQIA was published on the 20th of July. The IIA was published this week on the web. It was available and we were using the findings earlier than that, but it went on the web for a number of reasons to do with copywriter checking it and legal people checking it as well.
Okay,
there's a slight delay.
So that was meant to be published in July, is that correct?
The EQIA was, and we were on track and we did do that.
So no, the integrated impact assessment, that was supposed to be published in July, is that correct? No, right, thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you for clearing that up. Okay, Assembly Member Bakari.
Thanks, Chair. I want to talk about the evaluation of the programme. And can I just say, Emma, when you were asked to do this, you must have been in a bit of a shock, because 1 year to implement this in the entire London with every single school, and I know how different every school is in different boroughs. I've got to commend you, because you're a bit of a Wonder Woman for managing to do this. So, you know, I'd like the committee to recognise how difficult this was and what a challenge it must have been for you. You know, the evaluation that we obviously need to see of this is really important. And at what stage do you think, you know, that you will be able to publish those findings, and when will the final evaluation be published?
Thank you for the acknowledgement. I would also say that it was a massive team effort, and we could not have done it if the boroughs didn't get behind
and
us.
Lots of sleepless nights, I'm sure.
Yeah. but yeah, thank you. So the monitoring and evaluation has got a number of work streams in it. So we have independent evaluation going on, which has been funded by EEF, the Education Endowment Fund, and also by Impact on Urban Health, to make sure that we do have independent evaluation, not just an internal one. We also got insights, which will be taken throughout the year. We'll be getting the first take of that in December. So we'll be getting really rich insights from the actual experience of parents, of teachers, and of local boroughs as well. As I've mentioned, we're also doing 6 weekly check-ins with boroughs to find out their part or their experience of this. So we've got insights into the impact, we've got insights into how it was done, so the actual process evaluation will be underway as well. We've also got PricewaterhouseCoopers. You heard in your previous panel one of the quotes from that said for every £1 invested, the economy gets £1.71 returned. We're working with them. It's been funded by an external partner to update that, because we think that is out of date and it doesn't reflect the work that we've been doing in London. So we've got a whole series of work streams. The longer term evaluation can't be done within a year. So that won't be ready until next year, but these insights will be ready throughout the year as we go.
As part of that evaluation, I'm also quite interested in how it's been advertised as well. The GLA delivered 175,000 families with leaflets telling them about the free school meals scheme. Was there a particular way of those families being targeted? What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so it went to parents that could be identified. There's a clear rationale for public money on communications on all of this, which is exactly what we discussed earlier, which is continuing to ask people to register for pupil premium. Clearly, the GLA can only communicate where there's a clear public benefit to that communication. And because we had a kind of clear policy ask to both make people aware of this policy for family budgeting purposes, but also because we had an ask of families around pupil premium, that's where the kind of comms plan around this came from.
where are the costs in this? I'd like to know how it was decided, the costs of actually the implementation of the scheme itself and the cost of advertising it on public transport, tubes, independent, every school getting sending emails out to parents and the leaflets that I've just mentioned. Will this be evaluated and will this be open and transparent? We'll be able to see all of the figures for that as well.
Yes, I'm sure we will. I mean, I don't have a figure off the top of my head, forgive me, for the total comms cost of all of this, but it's a tiny fraction.
So is it separate to the free school meals?
No, it's all
budget?
part of the same budget.
So it's all the same?
Yeah, it all comes in the overall budget. That
so
was
the free school meals budget includes the comms budget?
Yeah, because the comms is integral to the delivery of the policy.
So my concern is that was it really necessary to have that amount of advertising, considering that schools were going to be implementing it anyway, that you had the support of all the schools to do it? By advertising it, I think has caused concern for a lot of parents that have talked to me, and we heard from the previous panel about cynicism, about it being just for 1 year, pre-election year. Lots of support for this scheme, quite rightly, but having that part of the budget committed to advertising it risks a very, very serious risk where the Mayor of London is using this budget to promote a political campaign pre-election, and using free school meals in this way has caused a lot of parents' concerns and cynicism, not just from myself, but lots of people are very concerned about it.
I have to say, we've not had any feedback to that extent. If you can point to any, then we'd be happy to address it.
It was mentioned in the previous panel. There's cynicism towards this.
Well,
the fact that
as I say, that's really
there
not
is 1 year to this approach.
Well, we'll come on to that, and then it's different. We'll come on to the advertising point because they're two separate. The reason why, as we've discussed already, there was a 1 year approach to that is that's the time period that we had confidence that we could guarantee the funding of it. It would be appalling, and we would be rightly criticised if we put this forward as a multi-year policy where we could only be confident of 1 year's funding. And in a world in which all local and regional government bodies are currently only getting 1 year funding settlements, that is unfortunately the world we are in.
But I want to go back to the advertising of
but
this.
You did ask about 1 year. So on the advertising, as I say, there's a very clear public policy rationale for publicising this policy, and it falls into two things. Firstly, families will be making, particularly on tight incomes, of which too many families are at the moment, will be making budgeting decisions around school meal costs where they need to be aware of this policy. And if they are not aware of this policy and they just turned up to school on the 1st
I think that's ridiculous, because every parent knew it was going to be happening. We got lots of emails from our school teachers and head teachers about it. To have even more money than invested that could have been going back to schools onto advertising is actually a bit of a waste.
Well,
and also, there are many other things that the Mayor of London could have been promoting, which would have been far more useful. For example, the cost of living hub, which a lot of groups have said to us have really struggled. There have been advice centres, charities who are having to do their own promotion of the cost of living hub. Wouldn't that been a better way of using resources to advertise that instead of the free school meals approach? I think what we've got here is a political decision that was made. And using free school meals in this way, I think it's a concern for me that we shouldn't be using this approach in such a political way pre-election.
Well, I mean, it's not for me to comment on. I'm a politically restricted officer of the authority. It's not for me to comment on the politics of it. However, all I can say is that there's a very clear public policy rationale for the communications we did. I'm delighted you say it worked. That clearly shows it was needed. But because to both bring awareness about the policy, but also to make sure that families are aware of the pupil premium implications for them and the need for them to fill out
again,
that
we've
form.
got webinars doing that, so we already know that's being
not with families.
that information has been spread really well on pupil premiums.
Okay. Are you suggesting we shouldn't have done the programme?
No. I'm saying that I'm concerned about the advertising. of the free school meals. That's my concern. I want to go on to the fact that it is just a year, and that has caused cynicism. That was raised, by the panel previously. The National Education Union members have also said that this is a concern, that it's only for a year. Does the mayor have any plans to extend it, and how will that happen?
So that's a decision for the GLA budget process. Clearly, at the moment we are stuck in this. As I've complained, and Assembly Member Garrett will know I've complained because he's sat through me complaining about it, about the kind of annualised budget process that we face, where we can only make decisions on an annual basis. Of this financial scale, we can only make decisions on an annualised basis at the moment. We are not in a position to know whether the GLA has the money to carry on this policy until we've received the local government finance settlement, which is commonly now around the 18th, 19th of December, and therefore the mayor will be equipped to make a decision after we've got that about whether we can carry it on or not. It's fair to say the mayor would like to carry this on, but clearly we
There's
can't.
A big risk that it won't. Inflation rates are going up. There's a big risk that it may not, and without government support. And I think, again, this is where we have the cynicism rising because of the fact that it is, it's a year's approach rather than a long-term approach. Again, this has been raised by the previous panel and a previous committee, that we cannot continue to have short-term approaches when it comes to children. We've had an education secretary after education secretary after education secretary. There's been no consistency in education recently in our government. And then to have another short-term policy like this, it is a brilliant thing to have universal free school meals. We know that. As a Liberal Democrat, I know that it is something that I'm passionate for, but I want it to work, and I want it to be for long-term, and I don't want it to be used in a way that is actually cruel to say, sorry, it's an Oliver Twist situation, isn't it? Police, sir, can I have some more? No, you can't, because it was only for a year. That's not fair.
Do you? Well, so I've put forward the policy rationale for why we can only commit to a year at the time, because we simply don't have any financial ability to make commitments beyond the authority. It would be unlawful, in fact, for the authority to make financial commitments beyond its ability to meet those means. If you wish to suggest an alternative approach, I'm all ears.
I wish that we could have a long-term approach.
We agree. We strongly agree.
I'm glad we're in agreement there.
I think we're in violent agreement about the need for a long-term approach. What I'm saying is the thing we need to get that is a multi-year funding settlement.
And I hope that the government will work with you.
Assembly Member Bakari, could you let the panellists... Richard was actually speaking when you kept doing... So, Richard, but did you want to finish?
So I think we're in violent agreement, Chair. I think we are completely agreed about the need for as much certainty as possible. The practical thing that enables that is having confidence about the GLA's finances beyond the one-year horizon we're currently working on, and that requires multi-year funding settlements, and particularly multi-year confirmation about business rates retention requirements, which is where much of this was funded from, and I'm sure we're going to end up discussing this further in the budget process.
Before we go on to the two members who wish to intervene, can I just also point out that I think the panel identified 1,100 families who weren't aware of the policy. So we talked about Lewisham, where 500 families have been identified. Emma talked about the 600. So it's clear that there are gaps there as well. So Assembly Member Buff.
How much was in the budget for advertising?
So there was a central marketing budget, which isn't part of this grant at all. There was £24,000 spent on posters. That came from the central marketing budget. If you then look at what proportion of that is against the grant, it's 0.02%.
So you're saying that 24k was not from this budget?
It came from our central marketing budget.
So what proportion of the budget we've just heard was allocated to advertising?
We've ring-fenced £100,000, but we haven't spent all of that yet.
100k.
So what's that in percentage terms?
I know the 24,000 is 0.02% percentage for the posters.
Yeah, 100k's a lot of money. What are you doing to bridge the gap between those boroughs who are currently spending £3 on free school meals and the £2.65 that is in the mayor's budget?
So interestingly, that's been seen in the boroughs that were already offering the universal offer, and therefore, because we're offsetting any cost that they would be incurring anyway as they were funding it, they've used that money to top it up. When we set that price point, we did that by looking at across the boroughs what they were currently paying and what they were contracted to pay in their contracts. We didn't find many. There was, I think, 3 that were paying above the £2.65 rate, and that's why we set it at that rate. We took the decision to pay more than government. After we set it, government then increased their rate to £2.53.
But what are those boroughs doing? Are they going to bring down the cost of their meals, or what are they doing who are currently spending £3?
The ones that we're already offering it anyway.
3 that you've mentioned.
So they were already offering. They were the universal offered anyway. The 5 boroughs that were already offering it. So we've actually given them extra money.
You're transferring an amount of money that's £2.65 per head. They're spending £3 per head, and so they have to spend in addition in order to top up, or are they bringing it? I don't know how they're doing it.
It's an interesting question. They're keeping it because they're contracted into it, but it's money that they were going to be paying anyway. So we've given them money and asked them to offset it onto cost of living interventions.
Not really understanding that
I think
they spend an amount of money on their school meals programme.
So for the small,
we're giving them a chunk of money for their school meals, which is less than the amount that they are currently spending. So are they spending up to their £3, or are they coming down to the £2.65? And I'm sorry, I don't understand the answers so far. A little
sorry, I think there was I think it's like misunderstood the question. So look, I think there's 2 answers to that question, which is I think there's one borough that's been cited as spending that amount of money. I think the gap on the rest where they are contracted to is over, and clearly that's a central borough contract that not all schools buy into. So it's much more, as the complexity of this is enormous. And so it's not clear that not all schools in that borough, which is Westminster, I believe, will be paying that amount of money for a meal anyway. The answer to your question is simple, which is, as we've already talked about, we are deliberately overfunding this programme by paying for more pupils per borough than actually are eligible for funding, and by then having a very high assumption of take-up in order to deliberately to put more money into the system. So yes, if there is a risk that a borough is being underfunded for it because they've got a particularly expensive catering contract that they have chosen to sign up to that's more than the amount, we hope that is offset by the extra that we are putting into the system, because we don't want to leave any school out of pocket for this. And so far that hasn't been flagged to us in any borough, and we've spoken to every borough already in this process, and we'll carry on that as well. That any borough is leaving its schools out of pocket because of the cost of individual meals.
Well, Dr. Vincent earlier in the previous panel identified that there were a number of boroughs paying £3, and I wouldn't leave any policy to hope, to be honest.
No, and we aren't. That's why we have a contingency budget. It's why we've deliberately put extra money into the system. We, as I say, we have overfunded this deliberately to support boroughs. Given this is the first, this was a short. We announced this at a relatively short-term basis, and that's the only way to do it. Where there is an issue, we've always said we will support that from the contingency budget that we have identified. However, no issue has yet been flagged to us.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hirani.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just recovering slightly from that exchange about promoting the policy. I know Assembly Member Bakari passionately always makes the case and promotes the fact about the Liberal Democrats including and introducing this policy in government. I'm sure she shares the equal passion about other Liberal Democrat policies such as the bedroom tax, the benefit cap, and also the trebling of tuition fees, and smashing records and taking records amount of funding from local services as well. My question to Richard.
Okay.
Oh, Coalition's back. The question I have is to Richard. At what point do you think you will know?
Sorry, Assembly Member Garrett, we've just come on to the question, so if we could let the Assembly Member ask the question, please. What is wrong with everybody today? Come on, deep breaths, please. Yes, Assembly Member Polanski is behaving. Thank you. Assembly Member Hirani, perhaps we can stick to the point.
Thank you. I'll stick to. I'll take Assembly Member Polanski's wise conduct today. So, at what point do you feel, Richard, you'll be in a position to make a decision on whether this can continue going forward as a permanent policy?
Should be clear, it's the mayor's decision, not mine. However, I think we need two critical bits of information that aren't yet available to us. Number one is confirmation of the local government spending settlement that is traditionally now in the last week before Christmas. We hope it's earlier, but that's I think what we've come to expect. The second is early confirmation in borough returns from interest from business rate and council tax returns, and therefore whilst not a perfect stab at the GLA's cut of that, because we don't get that till late February, we will have, we hope before that, but almost certainly next calendar year, enough financial confidence that allows us to make a lawful decision on this, on whether to carry this on or not. Because you can only make a lawful decision on this if you're confident you can fund it.
Thank you. And the final question is from Assembly Member Clark.
Yeah, thank you. Confidence in funding brings me neatly on to the next question, which is what action has the Mayor taken to lobby the government or work with government to provide universal free school meals for primary children in London?
Yeah, well, it obviously formed part of his submission to the autumn statement last year. We've joined together with some of the organisations that you spoke to earlier, and there is a cross-party but also extensive stakeholder body that now is lobbying very hard on this, and we're part of that. We've also, of course, listened to our young people here at City Hall. So we have, for example, our link-up crew, our primary into secondary age children, and we've had lots of organisations in talking to us about that. So, for example, Bite Back, who are particularly involved around food insecurity, and so the lobbying from then as well has been very strong, and that link-up crew is lobbying Parliament and government as well this week on the need for future funding for free school meals for the long term. And I've also obviously visited schools and spoken at various events, as has the Mayor, to call on the government to actually put this in central government budget.
Sorry, I was about to use the gavel then. I'm getting a bit gavel happy here, aren't I? So we've now reached the end of our panellists and panellist questioning, and I'd like to thank the panel for the answers that you've given today and for being here today. And as always, our committee members for the incisive and interesting questions that you've asked. We've reached the end of the session. The committee has a few more items of business to deal with. Oh, but before I do that, could I just thank you, panellists, and if you could take this back to your team, please. On behalf of London's children, thank you very much for taking forward this policy, and I know how hard it's been to get it into place, and the positive feedback that we've had from children and families has been incredible. So thank you, and thank you to your team as well.
Can I thank the committee for your thanks of Emma and her team, who've really gone above and beyond on this. It's been very new to the GLA. We've never done anything like this before, and so the team worked really hard, and thank you for your recognition of that.
Before we close, can I say one more thing? Since we're doing thanks, is that okay, Chair?
Yes,
Since we're thanking, I also just want to say, just to thank with the maturity in which not just this committee, but your team worked, particularly around having a equalities impact assessment and really looking at the need for kosher school meals, having an uplift, and addressing what is the national situation where that there is that budget gap, and also for the children with special educational needs. So thank you, and I've heard nothing but positive feedback from families, and particularly from schools, if I'm honest. So thank you.
And thank you, Member Clark, for raising that. I think that really needed to be said. So the committee has a few more items of business to deal with, but do feel free to leave as you are, rushing away. Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion? Can I ask the committee to note its work programme? And the date of the next meeting of this committee is on the 13th of December at 2 p.m. in the chamber, we hope, at City Hall. Thank you very much.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.